Hi friends, Angelica Veneta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to visit our website at inclusiveiowa.org for information on upcoming events and to sign up for our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 7th and final session of the Iowa Ideas Conference. I'm your moderator, Brittany Miller, and I am the Energy and Environment Reporter for the Gazette. This session is called Environmental Justice in Iowa, and it's within the Energy and Environment track. Thank you to ITC Midwest, Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust, and Inclusive ICR Iowa for sponsoring this session. Our time together will include talking with our panelists and addressing audience questions at the end of the panel. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and those will be sent to me, and I'll ask them at the end. All of our sessions have closed captioning access, and all of our sessions are being recorded. Let's give a warm welcome to our wonderful panelists. I've tasked them with introducing themselves and their connection to the world of environmental justice. So let's start with Karine, Angelisa, and then Sikawis.
Hi, I'm Karin Stein. I'm an Iowa organizer for a national organization called Moms Clean Air Force and its Ecomadres program. We have over 1.5 million members, and we are dedicated to fight for clean air, for climate safety, and for environmental justice.
I believe I'm next. Hello, everyone. I'm Angelisa Belden. I'm the communications director for the Iowa Environmental Council. We are a statewide environmental nonprofit, works on policy and advocacy. Our traditional areas of work are clean water and land stewardship, clean energy in Iowa, and we are working to advance environmental justice initiatives through that work.
Tansi Mio Ponipitikiskau. Hello. Good afternoon, good morning, sorry. My name is Sikawis Nobis. And I am the executive director of Great Plains Action Society. I'm Nehiya, which is also Plains Cree, and Salto of the George Gordon First Nation in Saskatchewan. And I've been living in Iowa City for 17 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here today. Today we'll be talking about the environmental justice movement, its place in Iowa, and its future. To start, let's kick things off. Broadly speaking, what does environmental justice mean to each of you experts?
Well, I think I got tasked with, talking initially about the definition, the formal definition of environmental justice, which I'll share, and then my two colleagues here can talk maybe about their experiences, and I can share as well. So according to the EPA here in the US, environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of people, regardless of race, color, origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And so what you're looking at when that's achieved is that everyone has the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards, and everyone has equal access to the decision-making process so that we have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. And so, what environmental justice means to each of us might look a little bit different, but the goal here is to have, that we're not living in a space where one population or one group of people is disproportionately shouldering the burden of environmental pollution or development, in their community or, something that affects their home. I'll let others weigh in.
I guess I'll just complement what you said, Angelisa. At Moms Clean Air Force, we like to put the language into something that everybody can understand. And so we have put somewhat different wording into this, which is inspired by the EDF, the organization that we work with. Environmental justice means remedying environmental harms that have been purposefully or incidentally imposed on specific communities, and preventing similar injustices from happening in the future. So it's an all-encompassing effort, and it simply complements what Angelisa just said.
For us as Indigenous peoples at Great Plains Action Society, environmental justice means understanding the damages that Christian colonial capitalism has perpetrated on the land, the climate, and all living things. It means understanding that institutions of white supremacy still hold up and run the show. It means that there is really not a proper separation between church and state. And it means understanding that the misogynistic patriarchy has undone the matriarchy, and that we need to rematriate the world in order to fight back against the damage that the Christian colonial capitalist patriarchy has done to us and the land.
I think that's a good, I guess, kind of segue into my next question, which was, what are examples of environmental injustices that we are seeing now and throughout history? And Sakawas, I kind of want to start with you with the, long-standing injustices against the indigenous populations.
What was the question? Sorry, can you say the question?
Yeah, like what are examples of environmental injustices that indigenous populations have endured?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, all of this land is stolen. That it would be the most obvious, I guess, answer. And then we'll just talk about Iowa. Iowa is the most biologically colonized state in the country. And that's because it was overrun by settler invaders between 1830 and 1860, who then completely destroyed the environment here by plowing up the beautiful the tall grass prairie and cutting down all the trees. And now what we're left with is this environment that is the number one contributor to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And the injustice is that this land was stolen, and that this state actually uplifts land that has been stolen and improperly cared for 100 to 150 years. Every year at the state fair, the state gives awards or certificates to people that have owned land and their families for 100 to 150 years. And like when you think about that, that's, if you look at it from our perspective, from an Indigenous perspective, that's saying, hey, good job. You've held on to stolen land in your family for this long, and you've destroyed the land with your colonial capitalist farming practices. And now here we are with land that is like, uninhabitable for most animals, for most wildlife. And I think we have the second highest cancer right now, or the highest climbing cancer right now in the country. And that's because nobody cares for the land here like it should be.
Angelisa, Karine, do you guys have anything to add?
Go for it, Angelisa.
Sure. Well, at IUC, we, definitely, supportive of everything Sakawas brought forward, recognizing that this land, was taken by colonial people who came and took that land up as their own and then have been farming that. We definitely look at land use. Sakawas mentioned that Iowa is the number one contributor of nitrogen, which is the cause of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So not only are we impacting the water and land here in Iowa, but all of that water flows into the Mississippi River, which then continues to add pollutants and silt on its way downstream. And so when we look at that dead zone, which impacts drinking water sources for people all along the Mississippi River Basin and into the Gulf, where people farm in a sense by shrimping and different fishing industries, they're losing their livelihoods because, the marine life can't exist in that dead zone, and it expands and, doesn't expand each year. Some years it shrinks. It was smaller this year because of the drought. We didn't have as much water runoff. So while you might look at that as a win that the dead zone was smaller, it's simply because we didn't have as much water flowing off of our land here in Iowa. And so we aren't just impacting, the land and the people who live here in Iowa. Again, Zakaus mentioned the cancer rate in Iowa, and that is something that public health officials are really, concerned about here in Iowa. Why is that going up? And so that is definitely one impact that we look at, is responsible, sustainable, diverse land use, that it isn't just row crop farming, fence post to fence post, and that we are looking at ways to, get people who want to be on the land and manage it in a responsible way. We've also looked at things like, the history of redlining in Iowa. There's been a lot of talk. The Iowa Environmental Council is a statewide organization, but we are based here in Des Moines. And so we've, been learning a lot about the history of redlining in Des Moines. A number of very vibrant Black communities were uprooted for the building of Interstate 235, which runs through the heart of the city. And that really affected housing for people in those, those neighborhoods. And putting that highway there has created, disproportionate impacts of pollution, air pollution and issues like that. We've been really, keeping an eye on disaster impacts as the large scale disasters in Iowa continue to grow, looking at how those issues not only affect, we talk a lot about how it affects farmers or individual homeowners in Iowa, but there are so many stories, and the Gazette did a great job of covering, immigrants who lived in the Cedar Rapids area whose apartment buildings were, destroyed by the derecho when it came through, and how difficult it was for those individuals to get access to resources to be able to, find a new home or get help as they were trying to deal with, that impact. Similar story when the tornado came through Marshalltown. I believe it was in 2018. The number of immigrants who lost their homes or, had difficulty accessing those resources, not only because of their status, but because of language barriers or, the ability to travel, to access those resources. So those are just a couple of the examples, we think about here at IC and what we're looking at. Doreen, do you have other things to add?
Yeah, I agree with everything both of you said. I think the loss of biodiversity in Iowa is simply unspeakable and tragic, and it affects everyone, especially, of course, the original cultures from here. But it is a reminder, what both of you said is a reminder that environmental injustice issues cannot be contained. What happens here doesn't stay here. It goes everywhere else. So I would like to do two things. First of all, kind of run through where to look for environmental justice issues in general. And then I would like to just address a couple of things very specific to Iowa with which I personally have been involved with in my work with Moms Clean Air Force and its Ecomadres program. So where do we look for environmental justice issues, or rather injustice issues? Air quality, water quality in the places where people work, where they study, where they live, because the daily direct impact of air quality and water quality in those places that you're exposed to day after day, and we're particularly concerned with the health of children, because children have developing organs and their metabolism is much faster than the metabolism of adults. So whatever adults are affected by hits children harder because of that metabolic rate and that developmental stage that they're in. So what is the air quality like where people live? What's the water quality like where they're exposed to it day after day at work, when they study, where they go to church, where they live? Let's look for environmental justice issues in terms of labor safety. What are the conditions like under which people work? What are the climate and disaster prone areas? That's another area that we need to look at when we try to find and examine environmental justice issues. I am very grateful. And access to climate adaptation. In other words, we have in Iowa, climate change is expressed in ever increasing levels of humidity that we get straight from the Gulf Stream north. We sit on that path. And so our summers are getting hotter and hotter and more humid. So what does this do to people, for example, who have to work outside? But how can they adapt when they have shelter in their homes? Can they afford to do things that help their organisms recover from that extreme strain? Can they pay for their electric bill? Can they, a pregnant person who needs to keep the body at a certain temperature so that the developing fetus is not compromised in his or her health before that little person is even born. Does this pregnant person have access to the resources to stay safe in the increasing climate effects? And that is an area also where we look for environmental justice issues. What I keep returning to when people say, oh, it's when they downplay or don't even think about environmental justice issues, I want to ask them to ask themselves this question. Would you be okay with living there? Would you be okay with working there? Would you be okay with your children breathing that air in and drinking that water day in and day out? And if you hesitate or your answer is no, then you for sure will be identifying an environmental justice location or situation. So just ask yourself that question in all honesty. Would I live there? Would my children live there? Now, specific to Iowa, Muscatine. I have worked with the Muscatine community for many, many years. The Muscatine is well known as one of the most polluted areas in Iowa. Air quality alone is compromised by manufacturing plants and by Mid-American's coal plant, which functions there. The air quality in Muscatine gets a grade B. That doesn't sound so bad, right? But if you have asthma and if you have any kind of pulmonary or coronary, heart issue, then a grade B is unsafe for you to breathe day in and day out in terms of particulate matter, those microparticles that are released by coal plants and by other manufacturing plants and by agricultural activity. These microparticles are 30 times smaller than the diameter of a hair. That gets into your lungs and into your bloodstream. The lungs can't filter this out. It goes right into your bloodstream and it will affect your health and you don't see it. So a grade B in Muscatine is not an acceptable grade. And we know that, for example, in that area, there are entire generational stories of early deaths, disproportionate levels of heart disease and lung disease in certain areas. And those areas are primarily inhabited by Latinos and descendants of, and second, third generation Latinos. Let's look at what happened in Iowa in the meat packing plants during the pandemic. That's an environmental justice issue. Meat packing workers were forced to show up at work, and the conditions under which they worked were not safe. And a disproportionate number of people, especially Latinos, died as a result of having to work under unsafe conditions in the meat packing plants. African Americans have died in Iowa and elsewhere in the country at disproportionately high levels during COVID. And why? There's a very, very distinct correlation between air quality and what that does chronically to an organism and that organism's ability to withstand infection, to withstand severe disease. It's not a coincidence that people of color died disproportionately during the pandemic. That's an environmental justice issue. I mentioned farm and construction workers, highly staffed by people of color. What are their working conditions? There is a real dearth of air quality measurements in Iowa. We don't know what air quality. We always think of water quality issues in Iowa, which is true, and land, soil quality issues, as Sakawi's addressed. That's serious. Why are we not talking about air quality issues? Because we're not measuring air quality enough in Iowa, and yet we see places where this becomes an issue. The last thing I'd like to point out in Iowa is mercury advisories. You know, we aren't measuring mercury enough in the air, even though we have big coal plants, both in Muscatine and in the Sioux City area in the west. And we don't know enough about the mercury levels in those places. What we do know scientifically is that there is no safe level of mercury. There is no such thing, especially not for unborn children and for young organisms. There isn't a safe level. And we aren't measuring that enough, not even near those big coal plants. What we do know, because I looked at this during, just pre-pandemic and early pandemic times, there were lots of water mercury advisories in Iowa. Lots of places, rivers, streams, lakes were declared as unsafe for fishing. Do not consume the fish that you fish in those areas. Well, who goes fishing in those areas? It's people who are trying to get out. And a lot of those people who want to be in nature and enjoy fishing are people of color. And thank you. Actually, one more thing. Thank you, Angelisa, for mentioning language access. I'd like to make an announcement. Estimados vecinos, por favor, tomen nota de que hoy la calidad del aire no está buena. Por favor, no permitan que sus hijos trabajen el aire libre. How many of you in the audience understood what I said? I'm sure a minority understood what I said. I made a public service announcement saying, parents in this neighborhood, please take note that the air quality today is very, very poor. Do not allow your children to go out and play outside today. Who understood that? A minority of people. So environmental justice is also very much a language access issue.
Thank you all for sharing those. I think the obvious next question is what's being done to combat these issues here in Iowa? What groups are taking charge? What efforts do we have here?
I'm going to let my colleagues speak first. There.
You each are part of groups who are, making great inroads in this. Okay, I'll pick on someone. Sakawas, let's start with you.
We're doing a lot. Firstly, I guess first is education, which is what a grassroots organization can really only do at the beginning of the work that they start into, because of budget restraints, like lack of access to the spaces where basically only white people are. And then as we've grown, we've been able to delve much more into, well, let's just put it this way. It's not just education, it's direct action. So education and direct action are where we started and where we still are. We're still doing those things. Like we were founded out of the No Dakota Access Pipeline movement. And we're, very much a part of the direct actions and the campaigns to stop the pipeline, and continue to fight, KXL and help with Line 3, things like that. And then again, back to education on Big Ag. And then we have, a lot of writing. I've written a zine, if people are interested in looking at it, at Great Plains Action Society. It's called End Stage Iowa, and it's all about the harms that Big Ag has perpetrated. For instance, I don't think a lot of people know that pigs are colonizers as well. They were brought over by conquistadors, and they ravaged the land, and then they brought disease with them, so that people, invaders coming up to villages, would find, people, the whole village decimated because of disease. And then here they are, being mistreated now in this state, and then that meat itself is also perpetuating more harm on Indigenous peoples, because pork is cheap and we live in food deserts, and so our diets are relying on these high fat and these high meat diets, and things like hot dogs and things like that, because pork is a food that is highly processed. And so And then the other things that we are doing is working on a land back campaign. In the end, like, and I say this without any apology at all, 98% of agricultural land in this country is owned by white people, and Iowa is a big ag state. And like, we're in this problem because white people don't know how to farm. And it's time for them to give up some of that land and give it to people who can steward it properly and allow Indigenous peoples to come back into these spaces and do what needs to be done to curb the climate crisis and to solve the problems that that colonizers created. And so we're working on this really amazing land back program. And I was really excited the other day to bring that information to Minneapolis and talk about it at the McKnight Foundation's gathering of people fighting big ag throughout the Midwest. And we are working on an indigenous land trust of sorts. I don't know if I want to call it a land trust. We were working with a Fortune 500 company on this issue, who then decided that we weren't a right fit because we didn't have a carbon capture partner off the top of the whole entire gamut of planning this. And so honestly, they weren't the right fit for us if they expect a grassroots organization to start off with a carbon capture planning our carbon capture partner when organizing or planning around these grassroots initiatives, because we build the plane as we fly it, I guess you could say. That's how it works when you're at the front lines and when you're a grassroots person. We do work with the Clean Up Mid-American group, but like not like directly, like more as a side partner, because we don't want to specifically be like in that group because it doesn't fit with like our view of the world necessarily. Like their views aren't necessarily our views in the same ways. And so yes, we do a ton of work in Sioux City, and we've been educating the Indigenous population who is surrounding the two coal plants that are still there, the Neil Smith North and South, which are two of the oldest coal plants in the nation and the dirtiest, and still functioning. And like basically north of these coal plants is Sioux City, where Iowa's largest Indigenous population resides, and south of that is the Winnebago and Omaha nations. Like right directly south is Winnebago, and right now North Neil Smith is lobbying the government so that they can start releasing their leachate into the water. So that water is the Missouri River, which would go directly into the Winnebago and Omaha nations, and that is like some pretty severely toxic stuff. Very, very, very toxic. We do drone work. We were first on the ground when the disaster in Meade, Nebraska happened. That's you should all look up the Alt-N plant in Meade, Nebraska. You can go to our YouTube page and see the video that we put together, and also a webinar concerning this issue, because we don't see borders the same way that colonizers do, right? Like this is like Indigenous land, and like it's not like we just contain ourselves within Iowa because Iowa, has a border that doesn't mean anything to us as Indigenous people. So yeah, look up the Alt-N disaster, or go to our website and like look for the video about Meade, Nebraska. And that's a super fun site now. That's where pesticide treated seed grains were brought to be turned into ethanol, and then ended up becoming like one of the worst disasters in big ag that I've ever seen. And yet nobody talks about it. And so right now we're investigating, ethanol plants here in Iowa to see if they are also doing the same thing, because it's not like there's any regulation on these things. The regulations on meat packing and CAFOs and ethanol plants and all of these industries here is ridiculous. And so I'm also part of a Territories of Transition cohort through Culture Hack Labs, and just released a video a couple days ago about big ag here in Iowa, and I'm happy to share the link. that I worked on through this project, where people from North, South, and Central America, indigenous peoples, are coming together to talk about how we look at land ownership and how we can change the narrative around that, and how land has been commodified and turned into real estate. And that's not good. So, uh, again, just always at the front lines of these things, always, doing what we can. CO2 pipelines, we've been involved in that fight since day one. CO2 pipelines is just going to extend the life of ethanol and terrible like CAFO and meatpacking practices here. It's going to give like an excuse for big oil to continue. It's basically where big oil and big ag are shaking hands and they're like laughing, thinking like, yeah, we pulled another one off. Like, here we go. Here's another greenwashing tactic. And we're going to continue to extend the life of these industries that are obviously killing the people and the land. So there's more, but I think I should stop talking so others can talk.
Well, you're certainly working on a lot, and we thank you for your work. Angelisa, Karine, y'all have anything to add?
Sakawa's mentioned a couple of great projects that her group is working on, a couple that we intersect with, the Clean Up Midian project, talking about coal plants and pollution and closing those unnecessary aging polluting coal plants down. Iowa is able to generate enough energy through renewable sources that the current use of coal generation in Iowa is simply excess generation that's being sold out of state for profit. Iowans are shouldering the burden of that air and water and land pollution. So we're paying through our utility rates to maintain those aging structures when we have the ability to both utilize the current renewable resources that have been built in Iowa and can invest in further renewable resources to ensure that we are not dealing with air pollution, water pollution, and still getting clean generated energy. The Iowa Environmental Council, Sakawas mentioned, a couple of things around, environmental regulations around CAFOs and different projects here in Iowa. That is a space. So the Iowa Environmental Council is a law and policy organization. So unlike other environmental groups in Iowa, we're a coalition-based organization. So many of the groups, environmental groups in Iowa, are either member organizations of IEC or work with us on different coalition initiatives. So those groups are going out and maybe doing the river cleanup or planting trees and things like that. IEC supports their work and also, individual Iowans and the environment through efforts at the Capitol. So state legislative efforts, local efforts at the county or even community level. So things like, working on legislative policies to ensure that, the DNR or the Iowa Utilities Board are taking appropriate action to protect individual health and environmental interests. So, for example, this year and for several years now, we have been working to lobby and advocate for improved siting rules for concentrated animal feeding operations around the state. The Iowa Utilities Board is actually undergoing right now a utility rate making study in Iowa. It was requested by the legislature this year in 2023. They asked the IUB to look at Iowa monopoly utilities rate making structures to say, how do you set those rates? And let's make sure we have a process that ensures those rates are affordable and equitable and for the benefit of Iowans who are paying those rates. So they're currently undergoing a study to bring back recommendations to the legislature in the 2024 session. And IEC has been really involved in that process. And throughout that work, we look for ways to engage individual Iowans to take action by speaking with their legislators and things like that. One of the other big projects that we've done in this environmental justice space is become part of one of the EPA, they call them TIC-TAC centers. So they're technical assistance groups. There are a number of different groups around the state brought together by the EPA and the Department of Energy. And so IEC is the Iowa partner for the Heartland Justice Center. And what that means is we will be available, this just launched this spring. And so a lot of the specifics around that project. A lot of the training is just getting off the ground. It is something we'll be involved in for 3 years. And our work there is that we are helping to provide support for communities, for organizations like Great Plains Action Society, Moms Clean Air Force, and others, businesses and individuals to be able to get grant writing assistance. We won't be writing grants, but we can help identify grant opportunities and provide assistance in getting those grant proposals together, connecting communities with one another, so that those groups can build off of that knowledge and really be able to take advantage of the dollars that are available through some of the recent legislative funding. And then finally, the last one I'll point out is that we did launch earlier this year as well a federal funding hub. It's called iafederalfunding.org. That's a project of the Environment Council, and that provides information about specific funding opportunities. So it'll provide information that people can go and look up if they're interested in something specific for their home, for example, home energy efficiency rebates, things like that. Also for businesses and faith groups, local communities, to be able to identify funding that is available for them, what they need to know, and how to apply for it. And so as those opportunities roll out from federal agencies, we are updating the information on that site. And again, that's iafederalfunding.org. And you can find a link to that through the Iowa Environmental Council website as well at IA.
I would say that a lot of what Moms Clean Air Force and its Ecomadres program does is complementary to what the IEC, what Angelisa was describing. We work primarily, not exclusively, because several of our organizers are very much working within their states, but many of us, including myself, we primarily work at the federal level, but we organize at the state level. And so partners like the Iowa Environmental Council are very, very important to us because it complements what we do. So let me just summarize. When I say moms, I mean Moms Clean Air Force. Moms cut its teeth on mercury issues, on the MATS legislations, regulations, mercury and air toxic standards over a decade ago, 13, 14 years ago. These are air standards, air quality standards that particularly address the problem of mercury in air. We have grown into all kinds of directions from there. And as I mentioned in the opening, our primary missions are to fight for clean air, to fight for climate safety and stability, and to fight for environmental justice. Those things are closely related because it just turns out that if you fight air quality, and the most dangerous air quality is carbon-based, you are fighting for climate safety. And you're also fighting for environmental justice. So we do that at the national level heavily. We are constantly in touch with our national legislators. We are constantly in touch with the EPA with anything having to do with air quality and climate safety and, of course, environmental justice. And so it's organizations like the Iowa Environmental Council that I rely on to understand what exactly is happening at the Iowa level, legislative level. Nationally, Moms Clean Air Force is very engaged in things like electric school buses. We work with the EPA and help communities identify funding sources because through the Inflation Reduction Law and through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, we have, for the first time in the history of this country, and maybe in the history of the Americas, a huge commitment to actually putting dollars to where our mouths are. So if we want a safer environment for our children, this is finally being acted on. You can argue that it's simply not enough. There simply isn't enough money for the environmental justice programs. But there is money, and it's the first time that a government made the commitment of doing that. So we in MOMS identify granting opportunities like the Iowa Environmental Council does for clean school buses, electric school buses. Why school buses? Our children are sitting in those buses, in those diesel buses, for hours. And in rural areas like here in Iowa, My children, my daughters are long grown and they're independent adults, but I did the math. They spent thousands of hours while their lungs and organisms were developing, sitting in a school bus, in a diesel operated school bus. And we know that the air quality inside school buses is worse. And what are these children doing inhaling that? So the electric school bus program is important to us, and we help interested organizations, school districts, mayors who are interested in working on this, help them find funding. Speaking of mayors, we are reinitiating our Moms and Mayors program, where we identify, again, we work with with mayors of specific communities who are interested in making a difference in clean air and climate safety issues, and we help them identify, again, grant sources. And the IEC is a phenomenal partner, because we can partner people with the opportunities, and then somebody like the IEC steps in and actually helps with the grant writing process and gives ideas and direction with that. Ecomadres, that's a major thing for me personally. It's a very important program for Moms Clean Air Force. It is involving empowering Latino and Indigenous communities around the country in speaking up. And I don't know if you're going to ask Brittany about what to do, what are our recommendations, but speaking up, I'll go a little bit more into that. Having the voices heard, because unfortunately it is true that somebody who looks like me gets attention easier. And it is something that I can't change in terms of what I look like, but I can become a partner. I can become a trusted a trusted partner, and I can help people take their voices about what's happening in their communities to the congressional level and to the EPA level. And also, I want to say that if you go to Moms Clean Air Force, momscleanairforce.org, all pushed together, you will find an enormous section of resources, fact sheets that are written about all kinds of things, and anybody can access them, download them, and share them. These are information pieces that we put together, many of them also in Spanish, about things ranging from plastics processing, methane pollution, carbon pollution, asthma, allergies, climate change, Latinos in the workplace. I mean, you name it. We have an enormous set of resources. These fact sheets are easy to understand by anybody. As I mentioned earlier, that's one of our missions, is to put the language, the scientific language, into a way that's not overwhelming. So those are some examples of Moms and Ecomadres, what we work on. And I'm on the Ecomadres team because I'm a Latina. I just happen to be blonde and blue-eyed, but I'm actually Latin American by nationality. I'm Colombian. Spanish is my native language, so I'm very privileged to work with a national team that empowers fellow Latinos and Latinas.
Carlos, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I forgot to add something really important that we've been working on for a while. It's building a Mississippi River rights coalition. We hosted our first Mississippi River Summit in the Quad Cities in May this year, and we brought, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, my allergies. All right. We brought 40 people, BIPOC people from the headwaters down to the Gulf of Mexico. And the reason I wanted to do this for so long is because Iowa is responsible for so much pain and suffering that's going on in the South. And I thought it was our responsibility to at least begin the conversation with folks along the entire Mississippi River so that we can see what Black and brown folks are doing, like what Black folks, Indigenous folks, Latina folks, Asian American folks are doing in terms of the different issues they're facing along the Mississippi River, because the Mississippi River is the most unhealthy and polluted river in the nation. Obviously, it would be, right? Because it's the biggest river. It's the catch-all for every, other river in its basin, which is massive. And so we had people come and talk about rights for wild rice up north, to what's going on in Bouvancha, which is the term for New Orleans, and Cancer Alley, and all sorts of issues, even and also in the Quad Cities, what people are dealing with in the Quad Cities, and so. From that, we've now been working towards building a coalition, and right now we're talking about an issue that's happening in the Gulf South, in the New Orleans area, where and all the way out to the Delta, where salt water is now flowing inwards because the drought is so bad. But that's not just the drought. I don't know if this is I can't prove this yet, but my thought is there might be less water also in the South because of the amount of silt that's being created from all the runoff that is coming from all of our soil, all of our beautiful soil that's being taken away in Iowa and running off into the Mississippi River, which is then ending up, down south, not just, obviously Iowa, but all over, ending up down south and building up, just building up there. So, anyways, I just wanted to mention that this river work is really important. Water work is very important. And that's another aspect of the work that we do.
I want to take a moment to remind the audience members to ask questions in the chat if you have any for our experts here. We'll be turning to the Q&A portion in a few minutes. And thank you each of our panelists for the work that you do and for sharing that with us. What more is needed to support environmental justice efforts in Iowa and beyond? What policies, funding, what resources do you need?
I would start probably, if I may, just overall, both environmental and other social issues in Iowa. I think that we can do a better job of including Iowans in the conversations that are happening at the Capitol. Throughout COVID, much of the access for people to be engaged, committee hearings, or to follow along in the legislative process was in some ways improved because they were providing, the state was trying to provide virtual access, but it was difficult for people to go up to the Capitol and have a conversation with their legislator as things were happening. Throughout that time frame, we were also seeing there used to be a 24-hour requirement that a committee hearing had to have a date and time posted at least 24 hours in advance, and that was done away with. So now sometimes we're seeing committee hearings, the legislation is introduced in the afternoon and a committee hearing is the next morning, and people don't have time to, read through and understand the implications of that bill and provide feedback to their legislators about how they feel. And so I think not only, ensuring that there's adequate time for people to, address those impacts and speak with their lawmakers and make sure that, their lawmakers are hearing from their constituents about issues, but also ensuring that the lawmakers are hearing and responding in an appropriate manner to those concerns. We do sometimes see a number of people coming forward in a committee hearing, advocating on a particular point about a piece of legislation, and there's no change made. And so, being accountable and hearing the things that people are asking for in those hearings is something that I think, as a state, when it comes to policies and laws in Iowa, we can be doing a much better job of as a whole. And that happens at the state and city level as well. But, from our work here at IEC, that's definitely something we spend session, being at the Capitol and trying to follow along. And it's hard for us who do it every day. And this is our work to be engaged. It's hard to stay up on everything. So I can't imagine what it's like for an individual Iowan who's trying to follow the process and be engaged, what that's like for them to try to understand and, be involved when they want to be, when they have jobs and children and language barriers and, they can't drive 3 hours to come to the Capitol to meet with their legislator. It's an important part of the process. We encourage people to get out and do the tree cleanups and the river cleanups and, get to know the groups like Moms Clean Air Force and Great Plains Action Society and others that are doing this work on the ground. And oftentimes we hear from people, what else can I do? And we really encourage you to talk with your legislators. It doesn't have to be during session. It can be now before session is starting. Give them a phone call, go to an open house, or when they have forums during session. Most legislators tend to have forums in their local communities on the weekends during session to hear from people. It doesn't seem like much to send an email action alert or to show up at that forum, but that goes a long way. And that simple action means a lot. Moms Clean Air Force provides action alerts, IEC. We have an action alert list, and so we'll message our people on our list when there's a particular action they can take during session or outside of session. I mentioned the CAFO rulemaking work. The DNR was just accepting public comments at the end of the month last month. And so we alerted our supporters to let them know that those rules were out and things to look for. And so we encourage you to go to iaenvironment.org and sign up for our email list so that you can receive those notifications. That's what we're here to do. I think the other big part of what as a whole we can do better is to try to just uplift the voices of people like Sakowis and the people that they represent. IEC has really tried in the last couple of years to get to know and engage with different groups so that we can simply uplift and support the work that they're doing, to help their voices be heard, to help people know that they're out there, and to listen to them about the things that they want to see done in the community. It's one thing to come in and say, here's what should happen. That's not the spirit of environmental justice or, even the Justice 40 initiative. It's about hearing from the people in those communities about what's important to them, what they feel needs to be addressed, and helping them do that so that their issues are represented in the work that they're, in the things that we see happen in communities.
I would like to follow because I would like to defer to Sakowis to send us off with the perspective of the First Nations. Maybe that should be the last message that we're left with, because in a way, that is the most fundamental message. Is that okay with you, Sakowis? So to complement what Angelisa said, I'm going to make some suggestions that are more step back, look at the big picture, and then also some specific ones. Fight the climate crisis. Number one, the climate crisis, 97% of scientists agree worldwide that we have the crisis, that it's real, that it's bad, that it is exacerbated by human activity, and also that there's hope. But time is running out. If you're fighting the climate crisis, you're fighting for environmental justice. And I won't even go into the details, that's a whole other conversation. But first and foremost, fight the climate crisis in all the ways. Air quality, agriculture, just in all the ways, coal in general, carbon products. Speak up. As Angelisa just said, if decision makers and reputable news sources don't know the story of your community, you will most definitely be overlooked. Now, speaking up is easier said than done because there are special circumstances. Maybe you're overwhelmed by life every day. And where do I go to speak up? Maybe I don't speak the language well enough. Maybe it's not in my personality to get up there and call. Maybe I'm just too shy to call, but I have this concern. Maybe my migratory status prevents me from speaking up, even though my child has a universal right to clean, breathe air. So speaking up sometimes means doing it through a trusted partner. And I think all three of our organizations can be that trusted partner. And in my case, I can also be a bilingual trusted partner. Of course, reach out to Moms Clean Air Force and Ecomadres. And I think you'll put our contact information in the chat, right? Also, you can look us up at ecomadres.org and momscleanairforce.org. It is our job, we are dedicated to staying on top of air quality and climate legislation issues and regulations, and we can help amplify your story, and we push Congress and the EPA to do the right thing. So do reach out to us. I'd like to reinforce what Angelisa said. Do sign those petitions. Do sign up. petitions, some people say, what do petitions do? Petitions do matter, and I can explain that more in depth, but I don't want to do so here out of concerns for the time. And then if you get further petition notices, don't disregard them. It'll take you all of less than 2 minutes. And then at MOMS, we compile them and take them to the right destination. And now on a global level, as a mom, as a world citizen, pay attention. Please pay attention. Encourage your school district to teach critical thinking courses. Engage in critical thinking conversations with your kids and your young ones who get their information from this thing. This is dangerous if you aren't taught critical thinking. An example of critical thinking. There is a very well done ad that's circulating from Mid-American Energy. I will be the first person to say I'm hugely grateful for utility companies. I'm a tropical person. I would just be miserable if I didn't have access to the power to heat my house in the winter. And I thank the utilities, but it's time to move on to the best ways that we know and the cheapest ways that we know to generate energy. So here's this ad saying that Mid-American is providing 100% clean energy to Iowa. If critical thinking is taught, then we say, oh, that's fantastic. Let's learn more about Mid-American. And then we find out that they have these 3 massively polluting coal plants still sitting on both major rivers, as Sakawis is pointing out. So why are we still generating coal energy if we're talking about being a 100% clean suppliers? Something doesn't add up. So let's find out. Well, we're exporting the energy. We're supplying Iowa with 100% clean, but we're sending the energy that we're producing with dirty coal elsewhere. Critical thinking allows us to analyze that and say, oh, so we need to be reaching out to Mid-American and our legislators to push Mid-American, a trusted utility provider, to make the transition to clean energy faster. Another thing, paying attention. Have you heard of advanced recycling? This is something. Iowa is one of 50 states is one of 25 states in the United States that quietly during the pandemic, the Iowa legislator approved the establishment of these advanced recycling plants in Iowa. If you don't know what that is, please ask us. It is the burning of plastics, and it is being presented as a solution to our plastics problem, which is absolutely true. We have a plastics problem, not to be denied. But by calling it advanced recycling and getting Congress to approve it as advanced recycling means the EPA can't regulate it under the Clean Air Act because now it's recycling, but it isn't. Where through pyrolysis, we're going to be burning plastic and putting it right, the excessive, the chemical output right into the air. And because if it gets approved as recycling, it's not going to be held to the Clean Air Act standards. The companies burning the plastics are not going to be held to the same standards of other industrial facilities. So now these things are going to be spewed into the air without the proper scrubbers, without the proper air quality measurements. And so we're going to make a terrible problem worse because now we're breathing in these plastics that are clogging. So pay attention. These things are important, and trusted organizations like the ones represented here today can help to get you to the information that you need to have. So, critical thinking and paying attention, and we're here to help.
Sakawis, you want to send us off?
Yeah, I'm. Please excuse me. I was trying not to cough. I have to though because of my allergies. Allergies are another issue here in Iowa, by the way. It's that time of year when all of the machines are doing their work, like with all of the end of year crops, taking them all up, and it's just the air is horrible. Okay, so things to do to support us. I'll start with the things to do to support like us as an org, and then I want to move into some other things. You can show up at our events because since COVID, it's been really hard to get people to come out. So we would appreciate more people at our events. We just had our Indigenous Peoples Day event. A lot of people showed up from Iowa City. I was happy to see that, but honestly, there could be more. Truthsgiving is coming up. Please go to truthsgiving.org or the Englert Theater and get your tickets and come to this event. It's amazing. You can read about Truthsgiving at the website, truthsgiving.org. And then check out our website, read what we have to say. We have a great blog. I have an article in reckon.news. I just wrote about rematriation. I would love to put the link, but the chat's disabled. So if it's just or maybe you can put it in something after this. Please invite us to your events in spaces that are generally, still white and underrepresented by Indigenous peoples. We'd love to be there, but don't do it in a way that's going to tokenize us. Don't do it just because you want to have us there so you can write it in your grant later that you rub shoulders with some natives, because that's a common thing that's done. A lot of organizations like to take advantage of that. We've had to cut off a few now at this point because of those reasons. And then, of course, you can support us by donating to us. And that's on our website as well. And then you can give some land back. If you own 500 acres of land and you have a couple acres that, might do well for a smallholder, let me know and we can work on that. And then I want to get to the bigger picture of things, though. I really liked what Corinne had to say about climate. That's very true. Basically, of course, there are people that are unable to, take part in some of these things because, they have more pressing issues, like basically trying to survive, right? And so that's understandable. But let's just be honest. Most people here in the U.S. are a large portion of the U.S. population has the capability to participate in something. And what I always say is if everybody did something in this world, we would be okay. But the problem is that few people are doing something and most people are just ignoring, the problem or the problems. And we just can't keep moving forward like that. I say that which it might seem harsh when I say that, just, get your head out of the sand and go do something. But I guess I don't have a lot of sympathy because as Indigenous peoples, we're coming out of our apocalypse. We've already faced an apocalypse.